Welcome to the Knowledgesacks podcast, a podcast built on listener submissions, current events, and politics, sprinkled with insightful historical context for curious comrades. We're learning, and we want to learn with you. We're planting seeds because we believe we only reap what we sow, so let's sow knowledge, optimism, and accountability, and watch our garden grow together. To submit your local stories, provide historical context, elaborate on a subject, or make corrections to a previously reported story, shoot us an email at knowledgesacks01@gmail.com. You can find our weekly podcasts on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Podbean, Libsyn, and YouTube. All relevant links can be found in wherever the description box may be located on whatever platform this podcast has been found. So today's episode is episode 1, Boricuas en la Diáspora. And we're going to talk about taking care of mental health, trauma, preparing for the next hurricane season, the actual death toll from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. That's what we're talking about this episode. We have a lot to cover. So let us get started. When you live in the diaspora and your family is trying to assimilate, regardless of how many years they spent on the island or what generation has been here, you get very isolated and it's very lonely. And, you're always trying to reach out and you're always trying to have conversations with gringos or with your family. And it's like they either act dumb on purpose because they don't want to recognize the oppression that they have faced. Especially when you talk about racial tensions and colorism in Puerto Rican culture, people clam up. They don't want to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about these types of subjects. So I felt, as a Puerto Rican that's lived in the diaspora her whole life, I've been to the island. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I've never been to Puerto Rico, that I've never met my family on the island, because I lived there for a time as a child because my family, my parents were having marital issues and I'll probably get into it throughout recording this podcast about what happened to me, how I ended up in the States, how I feel about living the diaspora, how it's affected the way I think, how it's influenced my life. I'll probably talk about that, for the coming however long I decided to do this podcast. But I feel it's very important as Puerto Ricans in the diaspora that we start telling our stories, because no one else is going to tell our stories for us, because no one else is going to tell it the way that we are going to tell it. No one's going to tell the stories of colonization in the perspective of a subject, of a colonial subject. No one is going to tell the story the way it's supposed to be told unless we start literally recording our history. And the easiest way for me to report, to make political commentary, and to give my quote-unquote opinions, because a lot of people will see this, these are just your perspective, your opinion, instead of this is your life. This is the life of a person living in the Puerto Rican diaspora in los Estados Unidos, in the United States. People are going to see this as an opinion, which is fine. But I'm going to give it to you straight, and I'm going to give you straight facts, and I'm going to back up my statements with as much information as I possibly can. Because what I've learned as a Puerto Rican in the diaspora is, in order for these gringos, in order for the white man, in order for these only English-speaking people to fully understand who you are as a person, you better back up everything you say with receipts and facts, because people will dismiss you. People will mistreat you. People will not treat you like an equal here in the United States, no matter how liberal they are. Neoliberalism is cancer. People who study colonialism, neocolonialism, and who tend to be leftists, and these left-leaning individuals do not like liberals, because liberals think it's okay for white supremacists to have free speech. Liberals think it's okay to equally share the history of Euro-Americans and Afro-Americans and Afro-Latinx people and Latinx people, they think it's okay to share these perspectives and show them as equal, especially in a historical context, when literally Europeans came to the United States and raped and pillaged the native people of the Caribbean and the mainland United States and Canada and all over the globe. South America, you have Spaniards, you have the Portuguese who colonized Brazil. And then you look at all these countries and you see the issues of colorism, especially in Latin America. I don't understand why it's so hard for Euro-Americans to understand that the reason why we have these problems in the United States and the reason why people hold on to their identities is because they are being attacked, and they've been attacked before Trump got into office. And that's what people need to understand. And that's what inspired me to start making this podcast, because no one is going to tell my story. No one is going to tell, and my story living as a Puerto Rican in the Diáspora away from home is much different from people who grew up on the island and moved here to the United States in their 20s and in their teens, in their late teens. And I'm not claiming that my life is harder than anybody else's. All I'm saying is all I can really tell you is my perspective, and everything that I say is going to be through the lens of my story. Just like anyone who reports the news, anyone who makes political commentary, they have their own lens that they see the world through. And this is my podcast, the Knowledgesacks podcast. And let's get this started. Let's go. Ahora nos levantamos. Now we lift ourselves up. A brainstorm of what to do next. So my cousin and I, my cousin is Gustavo Rivera Bon. What we think people should do is that we need to start sending direct aid, money, food, water, directly to our families and to community organizers actually doing the work in their communities on the island. And I understand that there will probably be Americans, white Euro-Americans listening to this podcast. If you're listening to this, you guys are our allies, our accomplices. And you need to listen carefully to what I'm saying. And right now, I'm talking to people who are Puerto Rican, living here in the United States, and our Latinx family in South America. So Puerto Ricans, we need to send direct aid to community organizers and our family back home. As in, we need to send food. We need to send water, portable water. We need to help our families prepare for the next hurricane season that's coming this summer. We need to make sure that our family members can't have to stay on the island. If we have so many Puerto Ricans who have been leaving the island in a mass exodus for over a decade now. If we do not stay in Puerto Rico, if we don't help our families and we don't help those who are fighting right now on the island to stay on the island and have the resources they need to continue to fight for their land rights, then we're going to lose everything to corporations buying out our beaches, continuing to buy out our beaches, and making public land, public beaches, into private playgrounds for the rich. All right, this is not the time to depend on famous people like Mark Anthony, like J-Lo, like hypocrites who got promesa passed. This is not the time for us to be supporting famous elite Boricuas, because let me tell you, these rich elite Boricuas are not going to do the work. They're not going to be the ones making sure that your grandma isn't dying from diabetic shock. They're not going to be the ones that are going to make sure your tía has electricity that has water. These people are not going to do the work. Unless they are on the island right now, passing out food, passing out water, you cannot trust these people to do the work. All right, I know I'm here on the mainland, And I've been doing the most that I can do. But I financially cannot go to the island right now, or I would be there picking up sticks because I do not want to be a burden on my community back home in Rio Piedras, where my family lives. And I know that I know on the island there's colorism. I know on the island, I know for a fact that everywhere we go, that there is colorism within the Latinx community. I know that everywhere we go, the colonial history, the abuse, the rape, all of it affects us still to this day. And we have so much to reckon with as Boricuas in the Diáspora, and it is time, another thing, on top of sending direct aid to our family, it is time that we re-educate ourselves. We cannot depend on the public school system in the United States, which is so broken to the point where they are privatizing everything here in the United States. We cannot depend on them to teach our children their history as Boricuas. We cannot depend on the white man, the Euro-American, to teach the colonial history as a reflection of abuse that is still happening to our people today. So we have to do it ourselves. They're erasing Native people from history books, from textbooks for our children. The Euro-American is erasing the history of Native, of Black, of Latinx people from American history because it does not support their telling of history. These Euro-Americans want to seem like white saviors. They are not. They are literally killing us right now in Puerto Rico. They are stealing our land from right underneath our feet. And if we don't start doing direct action and making sure that our families are staying on the island so we can keep our land, so we can keep a future for our children, and we can cultivate our culture. If we do not practice our culture, we will lose it. It is imperative that we fight for who we are as a people. Because, like I said, no one else is going to do it but us. No one is going to record our history the way it's supposed to be recorded through our own perspective but us. That is our job as a diaspora. Teaching our children, re-educating ourselves, and sending direct aid to our families and community organizers doing the work. We do not give to Unidos por Puerto Rico because we know that they stole the money. We know that they stole that money. We know the sketchy contracts that they were doing with Whitefish. All right? That's all been unveiled to the public. We know that there's corruption in the United States government. And we definitely know, as Boricuas, that there has been corruption in Puerto Rico because it's so easy. Because the United States passed racist colonial laws that prevents the people of Puerto Rico from accumulating wealth, just like the white man has done to our black brothers and sisters in the United States. The United States was built on racism because the rich, the oligarchs, use racism to control the workers, the white workers. Nationalism is a tool of the oligarchs to control the masses. White supremacy, it's in the name. If you feel superior to another human being, you're going to act psychopathic. You're going to treat people like they are less than you. That is why we have colorism issues within our own communities. Because when you're a white passing Boricua, some of these people are white supremacists. You guys remember Alex Ramos, who was a Puerto Rican person who beat the crap out of DeAndre Harris in Charlottesville. Look it up. Rosa Clemente wrote an article about it. All right, so we have white supremacists who are Boricuas. There are Boricuas who are voted for Trump on the mainland. By the way, for those who don't know, when you vote on the island in a general election, your vote doesn't count. All right, we're allowed to vote in the primary, but it doesn't really matter. If you're a Boricua on the mainland, you can vote and your vote counts. And there are Puerto Ricans that voted for Trump. So on top of doing direct action, on top of re-educating ourselves, on top of helping our families and our communities. By the way, if you are Boricua, Puerto Rican, our allies and accomplices should be paying for teams of Puerto Ricans. You know what I'm sick of seeing? I had a campaign up on You Caring, and I only got $95 out of a $1,500 goal to send me and my cousin back home so we could help with the rebuilding efforts. And I only got $95 in 3 months. How in the hell is a white kid who was bullied, which is horrible and awful and unfortunate, how is his mother pushing Confederate flags and all that crap and pushing people to donate to this campaign? How did they raise $58,000 in 2 days? And I couldn't even get $1,500 to send 2 Puerto Ricans to do volunteer work where their family lives after a hurricane devastated that island. And 3 months, how did I only get $95? Come on. We need Puerto Ricans, young Puerto Ricans, to go to the island and help with the rebuilding efforts. If you have the money to go, you need to go to the island and figure out what community, where your community is, where your family are, where they at. You need to help rebuild their homes. You need to plaster their houses with zinc. You need to do that. You need to do the work because no one else is going to do the work for us. You think that white people are going to go to the island and do the work that should be done? They can't even speak Spanish. How do you expect these people to do the work when they can't even talk to our family members to see how they're doing? We have white people going to the island en masse. We have police officers. We have firefighters going from the mainland. And there's a police brutality problem in the United States and the mainland. And you have these police officers from New Jersey who are racist going to Puerto Rico. You know that number one people who commit domestic violence are police officers in the mainland? And we're sending them to Puerto Rico to keep our quote unquote family safe. Who are you keeping safe? That scares me. They're sending police officers. There's more jobs for security officers in Puerto Rico than there is for nurses and doctors. There was a report from NPR a few years ago saying that an average of a doctor a day is leaving the island of Puerto Rico. Where are my Boricuas at from the Diáspora? You need to go back home. If you're so proud of being Boricua, then what are you doing here? Unless you have people like me who really want to go back, who really want to rebuild the island, who really want to see que Puerto Rico se levanta. We're stuck here because we're broke. And then the Boricuas who are flying their Puerto Rican flags everywhere and eating tostones on the mainland have the audacity to say, I'm Boricua, but I don't want to live in Puerto Rico because it's ruined, it's devastated. There's nothing there. How can you be so proud of yourself and claim all this stuff when you aren't willing to suffer with our people? If you're not willing to suffer with the Boricuas on the island right now, then you don't deserve to have the title of Boricua. You cannot claim your Boricuaness unless you're willing to go right now and suffer with your family on the island. People can't even go to public beaches because of the agua negra, because of the black water. On December 5th, there was black water from, I think it was Guaynabo, going and exiting out of San Juan, in the airport in San Juan. You remember those pictures? And El Nuevo Dia published an article, you can look it up, where you had all of those donations from FEMA. In English, we say FEMA, and in Spanish, we say FEMA. So all the donations from FEMA that was just sitting outside, aguasado, getting soaked in water, being ruined, the donations. And then when people looked at the donations, they're like, are you serious? They're just giving Puerto Ricans Cheez-Its and fruit cups? I mean, guys, Boricuas in the Diáspora, do you not see what they're doing? They want us to leave the island because they want to take over and do land grabs on our country. 80% of the crops in Puerto Rico were completely destroyed. This is going to take the work of young people, and people on the island are elderly. Our elders that have diabetes, that don't have access to insulin, who have high blood pressure, would rather die on the island and save it as best as they can than the young people fleeing. For what? So you can be mistreated like a second-class citizen and become the new slave group here in los Estados Unidos? So you can be a wage slave? So you can work for $7.25 an hour at Taco Bell? That's what you want instead of protecting your isla? For a little bit of air conditioning for what? Guys, do you not see that in the United States they mistreat black and brown people too? And then you're going to leave La Isla for this, when there are people like me who want to go back so bad and rebuild it. This is a struggle that Pedro Albizu Campos siempre, always talked about. That the white man will never see you as equal no matter how learned you are. The white man will never treat you equal. They will send you to war. They will send you to the front lines. He was talking about the Korean War and how we got citizenship in 1917 just in time for World War I, so we could fill the front lines with our bodies so we can become the new cannon fodder. And that's what they want to do. Some general here in los Estados Unidos in the United States, he just announced to everybody that we're probably going to go to war soon. And guess whose bodies are going to fill up the front lines? Our bodies. Our bodies. The Puerto Rican bodies. Pedro Albizu Campos was talking about this in the freaking 50s and 40s and 30s. And we're still going through the same crap. And people still haven't realized it yet. So we have to prepare. So part of the work is preparing for the next hurricane season. As we know, because of climate change, hurricanes are going to intensify because the ocean is heating up. The glaciers are melting. With warmer ocean comes more intense and larger storms. Tropical storms. So what is a hurricane? And this is, of course, all related links, all information will be down below. So hurricanes are massive storm systems that form over the water and move toward land. Threats from hurricanes include high winds, heavy rain, storm surge, coastal and inland flooding, rip currents, and tornadoes. And something that was not reported about Hurricane Maria was there were multiple tornadoes on the island, and I believe it was the west side of the island. But there were multiple tornadoes. And and people are suffering from traumatic stress. They're suffering because of the hurricane. And I'm going to go into that in this episode. We're going to talk about trauma, PTSD, and the trauma that people in the Diáspora have suffered as well. Each year, many parts of the United States experience heavy rains, strong winds, floods, and coastal storm surges from tropical storms and hurricanes. Affected areas include all Atlantic and Gulf Coast and Gulf of Mexico coastal areas and areas over 100 miles inland. Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Hawaii, parts of the Southwest, the Pacific Coast, and the U.S. territories in the Pacific. A significant percent of fatalities occur outside of landfall counties with causes due to inland flooding. When? The Atlantic hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th, with the peak occurring between mid-August and late October. The Eastern Pacific hurricane season begins May 15th and ends November 30th. For Puerto Rico, it's June 1st to November 30th. We have to prepare our families. We have to prepare our communities. We have to look into fighting for solar energy. In Puerto Rico, we have one of the most expensive ways to fuel our electric grid with petroleum. That's one of the most expensive ways. And that's what Puerto Rico is fueling the electric grid with, instead of focusing on green energy, on solar energy. We cannot depend on Tesla. We cannot depend on corporations because they do not have the interest of Puerto Ricans in mind. They're trying to make money. They're not trying to, they're trying to use the island as a guinea pig. They're not even trying to help Puerto Ricans. These people have selfish reasons as to why they want to help the island. People need to realize that corporations are not here to save us. They're here to enslave us, and they want us to work as cheaply as possible for them. That's why anytime you see unions try to organize, all of a sudden there's infighting, and then it tapers away, the fight for a union. Why is it that we don't have effective unions in the United States? That's a question people need to start asking themselves. There's a reason as to why people are not organizing the way they used to. So how do we prepare for a hurricane? Hurricane winds can cause trees and branches to fall. So before hurricane season, trim or remove damaged trees and limbs to keep you and your property safe. Secure loose rain gutters and downspouts and clear any clogged areas of debris to prevent water damage to your property. Reduce property damage by retrofitting to secure and reinforce the roof, windows, and doors, including the garage doors. Purchase a portable generator or install a generator for use during power outages. Remember to keep generators and other alternate power heat sources outside, at least 20 feet away from windows and doors, and protected from moisture. And never try to power the house wiring by plugging a generator into a wall outlet. So here's the problem. 46% of Puerto Ricans before Hurricane Maria hit lived below the poverty line. So please explain to me how Puerto Ricans are going to be able to afford power generators. And then the generators that people were able to pick up from FEMA refused to release them to the public when they came to get the generators. And you can find that article in El Nuevo Dia. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. FEMA was not there to help Puerto Ricans. They were there to obstruct aid from getting to the Boricuas who needed it. The U.S. government is not there to help us. They're there to try and get us to leave. Instead of providing generators, instead of fixing the electrical grid, instead of switching the electrical grid from petroleum to solar panels, to solar energy, which is cheaper to maintain than the expensive system that we already have right now. In 2000, there were 7,000 people who were working for PREPA. Now there's 3,500, and now there's probably even less. Explain to me, why is it that the U.S. government would rather send 3,000 Puerto Ricans on FEMA's dime? You can look this up, Google it. On FEMA's dime to the center of Florida and to New York City, which is probably more expensive. Do you guys remember how high the airplane tickets were? How expensive they were to go to Puerto Rico during the whole chaos of when the storm first hit, because the airports, the landing strips were destroyed. Look it up. They would have rather done that than to fix the electrical grid, and then the whole thing with Whitefish, And you're telling me that the United States cares about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico se levanta. And I'm going to fly my Puerto Rican flag in los Estados Unidos. And that Puerto Rico is a wasteland and it's not worth saving. Que bochorno, que bochorno, que bochorno, que bochorno. A lot of this stuff on the list from FEMA of preparing your home for a hurricane, you have to be able-bodied to be able to do some of this stuff. And a lot of the Puerto Ricans right now on the island are elderly and they don't want to leave their homes. They would rather die at home in their own beds where their family has lived for generation after generation than come here to the United States. And who can blame them? Pedro Albizu Campos was right. People here in the United States are not going to treat us equally. We're second-class citizens here. And you know what? If it's going to take Boricuas coming to the United States on state side to see that they're going to be mistreated, then you know what? That maybe you should come here and learn your lesson. Come on. Come on. So you can learn what it's like to be in the diaspora. You're going to want to wish that you were home every day. I wish I was home in Puerto Rico every day. Because what I have suffered my whole life, assimilation, and the American dream never existed for us. It was only for Euro-Americans who fit a certain type of identity. And you want to talk about identity politics and how all of a sudden we're not allowed to talk about our identities anymore? That's pathetic, because people use identity politics. Anytime a white person talks about being German, anytime a white person talks about their heritage and where they can exactly pinpoint where their great-great-grandfather came from in Britain and what European country they're from, they like to use identity politics when it suits their narrative. But when it comes to black and brown people talking about their identities, it's all of a sudden, oh, it's the Oppression Olympics. Oh, we're not allowed to talk about that. Oh, you're making me feel guilty because of what my ancestors did. And that stuff doesn't affect us today. Look at Puerto Rico. Some other things that I remember in general about hurricanes. Flashlights, battery-operated fans because Puerto Rico is hot, having a certain amount of cash stuffed somewhere. A generator is anywhere from $500 to $600 to $700. And then imagine that's how much it costs in a store here in the mainland, and then shipping it to Puerto Rico, which is what? It cost me $75 to ship a box with 30 water bottles in it. How much do you think a generator is going to cost? And the water bottles, it was like 37 pounds. So it cost me $75 to send it from the U.S. Postal Office, a package of 30 water bottles. So think about how much a generator weighs, which I actually don't know off the top of my head, and then sending that to Puerto Rico. On top of the $500 to $600 that you used to pay for it. It's unrealistic. We need to help our families install solar panels. We need to help our families. Period. I send stuff to my family on the island so they stay on the island. And I'm not wealthy. We have to help our families prepare for hurricanes. And like I said, a lot of the people on the island are elderly. So how are we going to prepare for them but going to the island ourselves and making sure that they're safe and that they have their houses secured and that they have cans of food in their pantries and that the young people on the island or the people in their 30s and 40s need to get up para que se levantan and that help their families, their elderly people around them. Like people, we have to really start re-educating ourselves. It's not simply about learning English. It's not simply about learning a new language, learning Spanish. It's about physically doing the work. Sending money, making sacrifices. I've made my sacrifices and I cannot be the only one in the diaspora because I know I'm not. I'm not by any means claiming I'm the only one in the diaspora doing work. But we have got to do work as the Boricua Diáspora. We have to start making sacrifices just like the independence leaders sacrificed their lives so we could have a national identity. Do you really want to be associated with a country who is stealing resources from Africa, who has 3 freaking coups that we know of in South America, that is continuing a narco state, maintaining a narco state in Mexico? The United States is doing that. Who do you think is buying the drugs from the cartels in Mexico and spreading meth and who's buying the illegal weed? Who is buying illegal weed in the United States? And then have you noticed that the states that pass legal marijuana, the cities, the DC, you can have weed legally in DC, where all our politicians are at. Do you ever wonder why that certain states are allowed to have legal weed that are majority white people? Do you ever think about that? Why is it that a majority of states that have legal weed have a population that is mostly white people? And why is it in certain states that is a majority black people, brown people, who have high prison populations? We only have 5% of the world's population, and we have 25% of the prison population in the world. You want to talk about slavery? It's still here, baby. We got women, incarcerated women, who are fighting wildfires in California. But we don't want to talk about climate change. We don't want to talk about how it affects black and brown people the most. Even the people fighting the fires are freaking slaves. They make, what was it, like $1 an hour or something like that? Whew. So let's talk about the lies that we're being told about Puerto Rico. Let's talk about the actual death toll from Hurricane Maria. This article is from The Root. Almost 1,000 more people died in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria than officially confirmed report. On October 3rd, during his horrific visit to Puerto Rico, because, he threw paper towels at a crowd that were probably pro-Trump people. My God. Que bochorno. That's another thing. Que bochorno. That there were Puerto Ricans that voted for Trump. Y'all should be ashamed of yourselves. Look at where you come from. The place that you always uplift in parandas. Look where you come from and look what happened to it. Because of Trump, because of white supremacy, because of the Obama administration, because of Promesa. Look. A century of colonization from the white European American. Look what happened. Donald Trump congratulated the island's governor, Ricardo Rosselló, who's a part of the PNP, which is the Republican Party on the island that supported and backs Trump. Ricardo Rosselló, the guy who hired his friends from Whitefish to fix the grid, even though there's only 2 people working there and all that crap, that scandal. You remember that? Quote, 16 dead people certified, unquote, Trump told Rosselló. Quote, 16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people and all of our people working together. 16 versus literally thousands of people. You can be very proud. Unquote. More than 2 months after the storm hit, Puerto Rico's Center for Investigative Journalism has found that the official death toll now 62, is way off by almost 1,000 people. The center looked at death rates in the 40-day window after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico and compared them with data from the 2 previous years. What they found was a major spike in deaths, at least 985, when compared to the same period in 2016. The number was even greater when looking at the entire month of September and October. This includes possible deaths from Hurricane Irma, which passed through Puerto Rico a few days before Maria. The number of additional deaths increased to 1,065. Okay, so the real death toll is probably more, but it's sitting at 1,065 if you take into account the rate of deaths from the previous year. If you want to think about it in terms of percentages, the average daily death rate in Puerto Rico increased by 43% after Maria devastated the island, the Center of Investigative Journalism found. On some days, that rate was 80% higher. The historic Category 4 storm, and it wasn't Category 4, it was Category 5. It hit Vieques it hit Culebra first. Hurricane Maria hit Culebra with winds before the eye of the storm even passed through Culebra. It was 104 from the winds away from the storm wall. So this was a Category 5 storm when it hit parts of the archipelago of Puerto Rico. Because that's another thing that's not being reported. Vieques and Culebra are a part of Puerto Rico, and then Puerto Rico is the smaller of the larger Antilles. We got a lot of people on mainstream media who are reporting on this stuff about Puerto Rico, and they don't even know the geography of the island, let alone the history. The historic Category 4 storm caused massive infrastructure damage to the island, knocking out power across Puerto Rico. Hospitals were forced to operate in darkness and without electricity, while towns across the island were short on food, water, and gasoline for weeks. And Trump is praising Rosello. Riddle me that. The center found the death tolls were highest among men and women over 50 years old who were living in hospitals and nursing homes and suffering from conditions like kidney disease, pneumonia, Alzheimer's disease, and diabetes. The center noted that these kinds of deaths during September and October were significantly higher this year than they were last year. The Center for Investigative Journalism also spoke to a demographer at Puerto Rico's demographic registry, which supplied the data used to count the deaths. Jose A. Lopez confirmed to the investigative outlet that the increase in deaths over the last year was significant. He also told the center that the low official count shows that the current process of assessing causes of death after disasters needs to be fixed. Then you have Rosa Clemente on the island reporting that there were refrigerated tanks, U.S. military tanks, near crematoriums, near funeral homes, if I recall correctly. What were they doing? From what I understood, they were cremating bodies just like they did in Hurricane Katrina to mess up the count of bodies. You have people being informed days after their loved one died that their body was cremated. That's very sketchy. That needs to be investigated if it hasn't been already. From the Center of Investigative Journalism, quote, "We need to have a serious and honest discussion of all the sectors involved," unquote, he added, noting that there is a lack of understanding of the process and its importance to the island. According to Lopez, from the point of view of public health, any increase of more than 15% in mortality trends must be studied to find an explanation, because it is indicative that something atypical is happening. In the case of some contagious disease, for example, when a 3% increase happens, we have to run, he added. Lopez also told the investigative outlet that it's important because an accurate mortality rate allows us to plan and carry out work plans to improve public health and prevent deaths, especially when this type of event will continue to occur. So you guys are understanding what I'm telling you, that these hurricanes, they're going to only get worse because the ocean is warming up, intensifying tropical storms, tropical, especially tropical cyclones. So the work we have to do as a Puerto Rican diaspora is to tell our stories, to re-educate ourselves, to prepare our families for these upcoming storms, and to secure our land rights and to fight for green energy sources. And we cannot depend on corporations to do that, because corporations, what do they want to do? They want to use our body as cheap labor. You can read the rest of the article. It's linked down below. But they reference another article from latinousa.org, and it has more on the reports. So the name of the article is Nearly 1,000 More People Died in Puerto Rico After Hurricane Maria. Okay, so these death rates are comparable to Hurricane Katrina. It's official. And the 40 days after Hurricane Maria hit, Puerto Rico at least 985 additional people have died. All right. When compared to the same period in 2016, new data first obtained by the Center for Investigative Journalism, CPI, shows, and this is in Puerto Rico. And if the entire months of September and October are included, since Hurricane Irma also passed through the island days before Maria, the figure rises to 1,065 deaths, despite the fact that Puerto Rico would have lost over 100,000 inhabitants due to migration this year. And there's more people leaving every day. People need to remember that. There was a report in CNN in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, that stated, 235 people are leaving Puerto Rico a day. And in the past 10 years, if I recall correctly, Democracy Now! Reported that 400,000 people had left Puerto Rico in 10 years because of the economic downturn in 2008, which really began in Puerto Rico in 2006, when the United States passed a lot of laws that prevented a lot of tax statuses or something. I have to do my homework again to remember correctly. It was 2006. By 2006, a lot of tax statuses that corporations had phased out, and a lot of manufacturing companies left the island. So a lot of people became unemployed because of the United States and the way they treat Puerto Rico as colonial subjects that are just bodies to use as labor. So when people leave the island and come here to the mainland, they're just workers. They're just low-wage workers. That's all corporations will see you as. They don't care about you. They don't even have 401ks that are going to protect, that are going to keep you fed when you're old. The U.S. government doesn't even care about its own people, let alone they're going to care about you. Right? We have demonized poverty to the point where you're seen as a pariah for wanting to eat and get welfare so you have food, and they only give you $200 a month in food stamps for 4 people, depending on what state you're in. The U.S. government doesn't even care for its own people who are white Euro-Americans. They don't even care about them. Let alone you think that they're going to care about black and brown Puerto Ricans. Yeah, right. That's why we have to take care of each other. We have to start taking care of ourselves. We cannot depend on people to take care of us. And especially white Latinx people, white passing Boricuas, get over yourselves. Stop doing the canito shit. You guys especially need to start protecting your black and brown Puerto Rican brethren, because the white man doesn't even care about you. What makes you think that they're going to care about your black and brown cousins, your black and brown family members? Eres patético. If you think, you are so pathetic if you think That you're better than someone else because of your skin tone. You're disgusting. That's white supremacy. That's what white supremacy looks like. So get that out of your mind. So going back to the article that's denoting the differences in deaths between years and the actual death toll that has left the island completely devastated. And this isn't including the suicide rates, the PTSD, the mental illnesses that people are suffering, that people have lost their loved ones. All right, so because people are dying. People have always been dying. That's a part of living. As a human being, you live and you die. My great uncle is dead. My great uncle died. My great uncle passed away, and we found out the day after Thanksgiving. So this is affecting my family. All right, this affects every Boricua who lives in the Diáspora who claims their Puerto Rican heritage. And if you don't know Spanish, the language of the people who colonized us first, if you don't know about Taínos, you best start re-educating yourself. If you don't know who Pedro Albizu Campos is, re-educate yourself. If you don't know who Lolita Lebron is, re-educate yourself. No one else is going to do it for you but you. No one is going to stand up for our independence but us. You want to be liberated? Then you start doing the work. Since September 20th, the day when the historic Category 4 storm struck the entire island with 155-mile-per-hour winds that left Puerto Rico without power, the average daily death rate increased by 43%, with peaks of about 80% on days like September 21st, which is the day right after Hurricane Maria hit, and 25. In October, deaths increased by 23.3%. The majority of these deaths were men and women over 50 years old. Those are our elders, guys. Those are the people who have the history of Puerto Rico embedded inside of them. And if we don't start writing our history and recording who we are as a people, it's going to get lost. The majority of these deaths were men and women over 50 years old and who died in hospitals and nursing homes from conditions such as diabetes, Alzheimer's, kidney disease, hypertension, pneumonia, and other respiratory diseases. And remember, guys, there was like smog issues because of generators. I'm not sure. I'm betting that those smog issues still exist because some people are still without power. My cousin was telling me that there are some towns on the island that you don't even hear from. You don't even hear from them. It's been over 3 months, people. This is a problem. We have people on Christmas in Puerto Rico who didn't have power. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But let's go back to the death toll. So we have people with diabetes, Alzheimer's, kidney disease. Because remember, the dialysis medicines ran out in some places. And a bunch of people had to be airlifted to the United States. Because they're too lazy to bring the dialysis treatment to the people who needed it. We had white people, white nurses come to the island because they're the only people with money. Let's be honest, because if you're black and brown, you tend to have less wealth than white people. We have people who went to the island who didn't even speak Spanish, who had to get people to translate for them to go to the island, who were begging the U.S. government to give them aid so they could help them with medicines, to help our own people with medicines. There are so many people living in the Diáspora who have abandoned their people. And it makes me angry. It makes me very angry. So, diabetes, Alzheimer's, kidney disease, hypertension, pneumonia, and other respiratory diseases. And then the smog. Think about the smog from generators. And we have people at risk. So, skipping ahead. Although September saw increases in deaths for all groups over 50 years old, in October, increases occurred in all groups over 18 years old. In September, the highest peak of increase in deaths was seen among people between 70 and 79 years old. In October, that peak pertained to people over 90 years old. We have schools in Puerto Rico. This is another fact. So, because of Promesa, which is something that you guys have to look into if you don't know about, this is about re-education. Promesa was a bill that passed that put in La Junta Fiscal, which is a group of 7 people that were appointed by the Obama administration. La Junta Fiscal was created in August of 2016. They shut down 180 schools, 180 public schools in Puerto Rico before the hurricane even hit. A lot of people had to go to the mainland and get their kids enrolled in public schools on the mainland. And this is Assimilation 101. This is exactly what they did to the Native Americans. How many times are our people going to be colonized? Decolonize your mind and free yourself. We need to go back home and rebuild what we got going on, because no one else is going to do it for you. Not even the Puerto Rican government cares about us. Not even people with money, because at the end of the day, the Puerto Rican elites don't care about us either. They got theirs. Why do they got to fight for us? They don't have to fight for us. They already got what they needed. We have to fight for ourselves. And like I said, we got to do the best we can with the resources we have. And that's that. However, the October data also showed significant increases in deaths for people between 30 to 39 years old, 36%, and also between 40 to 49 years old, 23.3%. This new data confirms the findings of a September 28 CPI investigation, revealing that at the time there were dozens and possibly hundreds of deaths linked to the hurricane, contrary to the official government death toll, which remained at 16 victims during the 2 weeks of the emergency. The revelation of this new data also coincides with accounts from relatives' reports of victims that point to problems with essential health services such as dialysis, ventilators, oxygen, and other critical circumstances caused by the lack of power in homes and hospitals throughout Puerto Rico. All of this you can look up online. Mainstream media in the United States did not report on this like they should have. The thing is, even mainstream media, even the quote-unquote liberal sources, exploit certain aspects of identity politics. But it isn't to have a genuine conversation about racism. It's not about having a genuine conversation about how to change the systems in place. It's just another way to spoon-feed information to people who are semi-woke. That's all mainstream media does. That's what all quote-unquote progressive independent media does. It's not about telling the truth. It's another way to spoon-feed certain information to people that are too tired or too lazy to do the work themselves. How is it that we had slaves write autobiographies about their lives and the circumstances that they lived in the 1800s, and we're sitting here complaining in air-conditioned rooms in the mainland in the United States and saying that food tastes bad when there were people literally recording their history and dire circumstances by candlelight, and we're complaining about what? Come on, Boricua Diáspora, what are we doing? What are we doing? I'm hoping that this is lighting a fire under your butt and inspires you to start fighting. And there will be times where you want to give up. And there will be days, and there might be weeks, where you just want to lay in bed and cry yourself to sleep. But I'm telling you, that's not going to fix the problems on the island, and we have to start fighting. And we have to start fighting. Puerto Rico se levanta. Ahora nos levantamos. Let's go. Let's start. Let's get it on. Puerto Ricans, as people living in the diaspora as Boricuas, we need to start educating our leftist friends on these issues. And if people tell you, oh, you talk about this too much, or oh, you're always talking about Puerto Rico, you tell them it's because no one else does, and that if you don't do it, no one else will. It doesn't matter. If you have friends that are getting weary of your problems, being Boricua is a lifelong struggle. And if people don't want to struggle with you, they are not worth your time. They don't deserve your friendship. if they're gonna treat you like, oh, your problems are so difficult, they're way more difficult than mine, especially if they're white leftists. You cannot claim that you are an ally, you're an accomplice, and you're sitting there telling your Boricua friends, because I've had this happen to me, oh, you're always talking about Puerto Rico, because no one else does, mija, mijo, mijex. No one talks about this. So I will. And I'm tired of people telling me that they're tired of me talking about it. Because look how little that you know about it. And the only people talking about it are people who are directly affected by this. And people in the diaspora are directly affected by it because we have loved ones who are dying. We have friends that are killing themselves. We have whole entire cities and pueblos that we haven't even heard from. Sure, you guys have your own issues, especially if you're white and you're poor, because a majority of Americans are living in poverty. I understand. But look at the neglect 3 months later. So, after all this, let's talk about dealing with trauma. Because as Boricuas in the diaspora, we may not have been there when Hurricane Maria hit, but when we didn't get to hear from our families for days and days, you don't think that didn't affect us mentally? Because I can tell you, it affected me and it affected my cousin because he had just got here, and then all of a sudden he couldn't hear from his mom and my aunt, mi tia, she's diabetic. So we were worried for her, and we still worry for her every day. It's not like she can afford her insulin. So this is actually from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Effects of traumatic stress after mass violence, terror, or disaster. It is important to help survivors recognize the normalcy of most stress reactions to disaster. Mild to moderate stress reactions in the emergency and early post-impact phases of a disaster are highly prevalent because survivors and their families, community members, and rescue workers accurately recognize the grave danger in disaster. Although stress reactions may seem extreme and cause distress, they generally do not become chronic problems. Most people fully recover from even moderate stress reactions within 6 to 16 months. 6 to 16 months! That's still a long time. So these are the symptoms of traumatic stress. So the emotional effects: shock, terror, irritability, blame, anger, guilt, grief or sadness, emotional numbing, helplessness, loss of pleasure derived from familiar activities, difficulty feeling happy, difficulty experiencing loving feelings. Cognitive effects: impaired concentration, impaired decision-making ability, memory impairment, disbelief, confusion, nightmares, decreased self-esteem, decreased self-efficacy, self-blame, intrusive thoughts, worries, disassociation, tunnel vision, dream-like or spacey feeling. Physical effects: fatigue, exhaustion, insomnia, cardiovascular strain, startle response, hyperarousal, increased physical pain, reduced immune response, headaches, gastrointestinal upset, decreased appetite, decreased libido, vulnerability to illness. Your immune system shuts down because of the parasympathetic, sympathetic responses that your body goes through when your adrenal glands are constantly going and glowing and going and going, right? This has a biological effect on your body. You have increased inflammation in your body, headaches, you feel sick. You are not alone for feeling this, okay? And then when you live here in the diaspora, depending on where you are, you will feel isolation. Just because I'm Puerto Rican doesn't mean all Puerto Ricans think like me, act like me, dress like me. We may have similar cultural practices, but we're not all the same. Just like how all Euro-Americans are not all the same, and not all Germans are the same, and not all Swedish people are the same. Right? Nationality in itself is an illusion, and it's constantly evolving and changing what it means to be something and not to be something. The reality is that we're all human. The reality is we're all Homo sapiens. And to sit here and say that I am this and I am that, right? So identity politics is important within itself. Because we use identity politics, we use nationalism, we use racism to put people in boxes and to say, oh, stereotypically, you're supposed to think like this and you're supposed to act like this. And people will, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. People will act out these realities that they have been imposed upon them. People will act out these realities that are imposed upon them. They're playing a role. And the reality is that we're all Homo sapiens. And until we start realizing this and integrating this into how we treat one another and respectfully and kindly, we're not going to become a compassionate society that's evidence-based. We're going to become and continue to devolve into a society of people who are having sex with robots instead of giving sex workers rights. Which is what we've already been doing. Have you heard of Samantha the Sex Robot in an Austrian robotic expo? If not, look it up. A bunch of people damaged a $5,000 robot at an Austrian robot expo. Samantha the Sex Robot had damage to her upper body and her neck from abuse that the robot had received at a robot expo. All right, so we don't even treat the representation of femaleness with kindness and respect. So what makes you think that we're going to treat sex workers with kindness and respect? What makes you think we're going to treat undocumented people with kindness and respect as they sit in concentration camp-like conditions with their the Sixth Amendment right infringed upon? Because here in the United States, if you're not white Euro-American, you're going to be mistreated by the government. And that's the reality that people need to start waking up to. So, going back to this, this online page from the VA, the Veteran Affairs Office, on PTSD. So here are the interpersonal effects. Increased relational conflict, social withdrawal, reduced relational intimacy, alienation, impaired work performance, impaired school performance, decreased satisfaction, distrust, externalization of blame, externalization of vulnerability, feeling abandoned, rejected, overprotectiveness. Although many of the above reactions seem negative, it must be emphasized that people also show a number of positive responses in the aftermath of disaster. Because as I recall, there was a Facebook page that I followed that a lot of Boricuas on the island and a lot of people in the Diáspora, it was like Puerto Rico Hurricane Maria updates. People were posting from the island onto the page of their communities gathering together, cooking arroz con habichuela over fires, and they were, there were kids playing in the street, and this is also classism as well, because these were areas that were fenced, that were suburban areas. There are places still without running water, without food, and it is all based on class. Do you think the political ruling class is without power right now? And then Ricardo Rosello has been staying in Florida almost the whole time. He's been in Florida. He hasn't been suffering next to the people in Puerto Rico. You kidding me? If you have money, you probably have power. And before that, you probably had the ability to afford a generator. That's why I don't understand when anyone protects these elite class, these protected classes. You're not being protected by the police if you're poor. You're the target. Okay, so those effects were common traumatic stress reactions And then we went over the emotional effects, the cognitive effects, the physical effects, and the interpersonal effects. And now we're going to go into the problematic stress responses. The following responses are less common and indicate that the individual will likely need assistance from a medical or mental health professional. It's important that we pinpoint what these problematic stress responses is so we can help our comrades get the help that they need. Even if it's, look, most of us are poor, so the most that we can do is listen to our comrades who are suffering and finding local sources that provide free mental health services. I cannot give you a list. I do not live on the island, and I genuinely am curious if there are free mental health services on the island. If you know of places in Puerto Rico providing mental health services, even in the mainland, like in places like Pennsylvania, where they have seen a large increase of Boricuas coming to areas in like Lancaster and places like that. Please try and look for places that are Boricuas providing mental health services for Boricuas, because we don't have the same mental health issues as Euro-American people, and psychological studies are finding that people of color show different symptoms of PTSD, of traumatic stress, of PTSD. Okay, so there's different types of psychological issues that people of color face, and I would prefer, and I know many Boricuas would prefer to see a person of color when they talk about their psychological issues, especially when we're this vulnerable, when we've suffered as much as we have suffered. So like I said, if you know of any free health clinics, please send them to me in an email, and if I accumulate enough of them, then I'll be able to make a segment in a podcast as to where people can find mental health services, because this is vital. This is vital because we have people suffering and they will continue to suffer. And like I said, this VA website is saying that these symptoms, not the permanent symptoms, but these symptoms alone can last from 6 to 16 months. That's over a year, guys. And we have hurricane season coming June 1st. I want to inspire you to be prepared for what's coming. And we have to educate. The following responses are less common and indicate that the individual will likely need assistance from a medical or mental health professional. Severe dissociation, feeling as if the world is unreal, not feeling connected to one's own body, losing one's sense of identity or taking on a new identity, amnesia, severe intrusive re-experiencing, flashbacks, terrifying screen memories, or nightmares, repetitive automatic reenactment, extreme avoidance, agoraphobic-like social or vocational withdrawal, compulsive avoidance, severe hyperarousal, panic episodes, terrifying nightmares, difficulty controlling violent impulses, inability to concentrate, debilitating anxiety, ruminative worry, so constant going over the same things over and over again. And I have PTSD, and a lot of these symptoms I have experienced, and they are very intrusive and very obvious. And if you have a friend, especially if they're a person of color, especially if they're Boricua, you need to help them seek help, or not. I'm not trying to make you guys be intrusive in someone else's life and force them to do things. But it is important that we tell our friends that if they're experiencing these things, just to suggest or help them find mental health. Talking to these people is important. Talking to people suffering from these issues is important, because that isolation you feel, that disconnect you feel, isn't going to go away on its own unless you address it and acknowledge that it's happening. Because like in AA, they always say, which I'm not a real big proponent of AA, but if it works for you, it works, right? But the first step is acknowledging and identifying that you have a problem. And if you are having mental health problems, there is no shame in that. You should not be ashamed of feeling. You should not be ashamed of emotions. You should not be ashamed of expressing emotions other than anger, other than sadness. You should not be forced to feel any type of way except the emotion that you are experiencing, except the emotion that you're experiencing and the emotions that you are feeling. They are valid, they are real, and you're allowed to feel them. But when they become so intrusive in your life that you cannot function, you need to seek help. Killing yourself is not going to help anyone around you. It may feel like it will alleviate all your pain, but as a person who has tried to attempt to take their own life and who was very, very upset and angry for a year and a half after they tried to commit suicide, I can tell you from the other side that you will make it, that you will survive, and the hurt and the pain, you will heal from it, and you are not alone. And the isolation that you feel is the colonizers trying to isolate you and disconnect you from the world. And you have to find it within yourself to help your community and heal as best as you can. So here's some more symptoms. Unshakable obsessions, paralyzing nervousness, fear of losing control, going crazy, severe depression, lack of pleasure in life, feelings of worthlessness, self-blame, dependency, early awakening, problematic substance abuse, abuse or dependency, self-medication, psychotic symptoms, delusions, hallucinations, bizarre thoughts or images. Some people will be more affected by a traumatic event for a longer period of time than others, depending on the nature of the event and the nature of the individual who experienced the event. One of the most debilitating effects of traumatic stress is a condition known as PTSD. The current trauma literature suggests that many factors are related to the increased or decreased risk of PTSD. The likelihood of developing PTSD and the severity and chronicity of symptoms experienced is a function of many variables, the most important being exposure to a traumatic event. In this case, such as a natural disaster, or a rape, or molestation. In my research, I have found that women tend to get PTSD, or women are more likely to get PTSD, to develop PTSD. So these symptoms of PTSD are going to be triggered by an exposure to a traumatic stressor, re-experiencing symptoms, avoidance and numbing symptoms, symptoms of increased arousal, duration of at least 1 month. So this website goes on to express and elaborate on these symptoms for the criteria of PTSD. If you would like to educate yourself more on that, you can do this on your own time. So this is what I found very, very interesting about this. The following types of exposure place survivors at high risk for a range of post-disaster problems, such as exposure to mass destruction or death, toxic contamination, and I'm going to talk about the water crisis in Puerto Rico, sudden or violent death of a loved one, loss of home or community, all of which are events that many Puerto Ricans on the island have experienced, and now they are living in the Diáspora, and some of them don't even know English. So we need to work on helping our families, our friends, our fellow Boricuas to find the help that they need. Mental health services, we need to help them find them. This is one of the many things that Boricuas and the Diáspora can do for our fellow Boricuas who are on the island, and for ourselves who are suffering traumatic stress symptoms and potentially eventually will suffer from PTSD. So this is something that's very interesting as well. Here are some statistics. The rates of acute stress disorder, as cited in Bryant from 2000, following traumatic incidents vary, with higher rates reported for human-caused trauma. this section of this website is called Who Develops ASD and PTSD. So the good news is most trauma survivors, according to the website, will be upset for several weeks following an event, but will recover to a variable degree without treatment. All right, but we have to help our fellow Boricuas get help. The rates of acute stress disorder, ASD, typhoon, 7%, industrial accident, 6%, mass shooting, 33%, violent assault, 19%, MVA, 14%, assault, burn, indust, 13%. All right, so there is a rate here of people who will potentially need mental health treatment for the rest of their lives, or will suffer from mental health issues for the rest of their lives because of Hurricane Maria, because of not having access to water, because of the destruction of their homes, because of the poor government response. And this is the fault of the U.S. government. And regardless if they take responsibility for what they have done is a whole nother episode. But the answer to that is probably not. And that's what I'm trying to tell you guys, that we have to take care of ourselves. We cannot depend on anyone else to take care of us. We have to take care of each other as a collective, because we are the only ones who are going to give a damn about each other, and potentially other Latinx individuals may care, and maybe some of our white leftist friends. But we cannot depend on those individuals to take care of Boricuas. We cannot. If we want our traditions and our culture to live on, we have to fight for it to live. And simply moving to the Diáspora and pretending that the stuff happening in Puerto Rico is only happening to the poor people is disgusting and pathetic. Because we're all a collective. We are all one. And if you don't start thinking that just because you have money and that the poor Boricuas, that they deserve what they got, that's disgusting. I'm tired of these Catholic hypocrites sitting here saying that poor people deserve what they get, especially when they're Boricua. And then they read their Bibles and they go to church, and then they hear that the meek and the humble will inherit the earth. And they hear all these Bible verses and the Beatitudes. And look how they live their life. Several factors present in the acute phase recovery environment of a disaster have been found to aggravate stress reactions and therefore increase a survivor's risk of developing negative outcomes. Lack of emotional social support, which happens a lot to Puerto Ricans that move to the Diáspora. Presence of other stressors such as fatigue, cold, hunger, fear, uncertainty, loss, dislocation, and other psychologically stressful experiences. Difficulties at the scene. Lack of information about the nature and reasons for the events, lack of or interference with self-determination and self-management, treatment in an authoritarian or impersonal manner. And you know what? So all of these adverse effects that increase the likelihood of acute stress disorder and PTSD is happening right now on the island with the lack of disaster response and FEMA doing all this crap and being slow about helping people in the Red Cross. They haven't done jack crap. They have not. FEMA and the U.S. government has completely mishandled the atrocity that is happening to the Puerto Rican people right now on December 26, 2017, which is when this episode was recorded. So here is what mitigates these factors. Here's what prevents these symptoms from becoming detrimental in the lives of Boricuas who have gone through this adverse experience of being mistreated by the United States government and the after effects of Hurricane Maria and going through Hurricane Maria. Same thing with the people who went through Hurricane Katrina. Same thing with the people who went through Hurricane Harvey. You have social support, higher income and education, successful mastery of past disasters and traumatic events, limitation or reduction of exposure to any of the aggravating factors listed above, provision of information about expectations and availability of recovery services, care, concern, and understanding on the part of the recovery services personnel, provision of regular and appropriate information concerning the emergency and reasons for actions. So that is what I'm trying to tell you. We have to re-educate ourselves. We have to send money back home. We have to provide direct aid to those doing the work, like the feminist collective. We have to support our community organizers who are actually doing the work in Puerto Rico and have done the work to uplift our people. Do not give to some general organization like the Red Cross or FEMA or Unidos por Puerto Rico because they're stealing our money, because NGOs are just another form of corporate greed. Look at the Clinton Foundation. Look at the Trump Foundation. Look at all these foundations run by rich people. It's just another way to get a tax deduction and to funnel money to cause issues in poor countries. It's another way of robbing from poor people, which is what the rich elites have always done. But we live in a feudalistic system where the workers are producing all the money for the rich and we're getting crumbs. And I'm sick of it. And I'm sick of poor Puerto Ricans voting for people like Trump and Rosello and receiving nothing but empty promises, and their schools are closing, and Wall Street runs the Junta Fiscal, basically. And people are not realizing all of these connections. Every one of us is intelligent enough to do the research and teach ourselves the information that we need to know. If there were slaves who were writing autobiographies by candlelight and teaching themselves how to read in the dark, knowing that if a white person knew that they were teaching themselves how to read, or if another white person was teaching them how to read and that white person got caught teaching a black slave, an African slave, how to read, that they would have been beaten to death. What are we doing as Boricuas Diáspora, enjoying our heat or air conditioner while our fellow brethren on the island are hungry, without power, without electricity, who are addicted to drugs? We have a narco state in Puerto Rico. How is it that we still have the Jones Act in place? And what, you understand what I'm trying to say? We have all of these adverse political things happening as colonial subjects, and we're supposed to accept these crumbs? No. We as a people need to start educating each other, and we need to start standing up to this bullcrap. And we have to start preparing the island for the next storms, because this isn't going to change. This is only going to get worse, and I will do my best and the most I can because I'm only one person. And if there's millions of us in the diaspora, can you imagine what we could do if we worked together? And if we all mustered our strength together? We could change the world. And we deserve better. We all deserve better. Associated disorders, of course, with PTSD and ASD, unsurprisingly, is depression, substance abuse, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, sexual dysfunction, and eating disorders, because all of these disorders revolve around controlling your environment. When you are a part of a when you experience a natural disaster and you experience trauma, you want to control everything around yourself the best way you can, and a lot of people do that by partaking in problematic behaviors, thinking that it's a healthy solution for themselves because it only affects their life. But the reality is mental illness affects everyone around you, especially when it's untreated. You can live there's no such thing as a normal person. There's no such thing as what a normal, typical person behaves or acts like. There's no such thing as a perfect victim. There's no such thing as perfection, because none of us will ever be perfect. We're all problematic in our own ways, and people need to realize that. And an apology isn't enough to heal from trauma. Action is what we need. I wanted to read segments of this webpage so people have a better idea of how traumatic events can affect humans psychologically, and I wanted to explain as scientifically fact-based, evidence-based as possible, because it's one thing to pull information out of my butt and it's another thing to actually have the facts. So now that we've talked about what PTSD and what causes PTSD, I want to go through a couple of articles and a couple of a couple of audio segments. Of course, like I said, all these links are down below of how this trauma is affecting Puerto Ricans. So this article is from PBS. The psychological toll of natural disasters and how mainland Puerto Ricans are coping. And this article came out October 1st. Yarimar Bonilla and other people in the U.S. territories shudder when they are asked whether their families in Puerto Rico are quote-unquote okay. Because it feels like people are really asking whether their families are still alive. They're not okay. And we want to talk about it, how not okay they are, said Bonilla, who is from Puerto Rico and an associate professor of Latino and Caribbean Studies at Rutgers University. With sleepless nights and anxiety exacerbated by President Donald Trump lashing out at a public official who begged for help, I think they're referencing Carmen Yulín Cruz, Bonilla and other Puerto Ricans on the mainland are navigating unique traumatic experiences. And I hate when they say unique. They're not unique. Like these patterns are observed over and over again. And I will elaborate on that more here in a minute. As they wait to hear about whether their families are in danger, and when they hear about the circumstances, their reactions can range from sadness, helplessness, anguish, and survivor guilt to anger or depression. We feel guilty that we're not there experiencing what our family members and their kids are experiencing, she said. Everyone I know here is completely sleep deprived. There are an estimated 5 million Puerto Ricans in the mainland United States, many of whom have families on the island but have yet to hear from them. The hurricane wiped out power across the island, which might not be fully restored for a year. And there was a report, I believe, from the New York Times that said it might be 8 months from December until people have power. But there's no such thing as racism, and identity politics is stupid, right? Many people, especially those outside major cities, have been without food or water since the storm. And this was reported October 1st, and the storm hit September 20th. And as you recall earlier in the episode, September 21st was the beginning of when the deaths started to peak in Puerto Rico. On Saturday, Trump criticized San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz for quote-unquote poor leadership after she spoke of devastation and horror on the island in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria and pleaded for help and support from the federal government. Bonilla said she feels fortunate because her mother has a landline that remained intact, and she was able to hole herself up in a safe room in the middle of their home in San Juan with a D battery, a radio, water, and snacks in case she became stranded. She was fully dressed. This is a quote. She was fully dressed in case she had to run out in the middle of something. She didn't want to get caught in her pajamas. And I'm sorry I'm laughing, but my mom, she would always make us dress up even when we were going to get groceries in the store because she was like, you never know when you're gonna meet the president and stuff like that. So I relate to that a lot. So anyway, Bonilla said, and she was also wearing a whistle in case she fell and had a stroke, she could signal for help. That's why people in the Diáspora were freaking out when they heard the devastation that happened because of Maria. Her mother survived, but emerged to a humanitarian crisis on an island that now has little clean water, electricity, money, or food. Because when the storm first hit, I don't know if people recall this, you could only use cash because the telecommunications were down, and those ATM card readers, they run on landlines, they run on telecommunications. So you couldn't use your ATM card. You had to get cash, and then you could only get a certain amount of cash out of the ATM machines. So, I mean, this is what Puerto Ricans were facing, and some people still face. I mean, things are normalizing a little bit, but beforehand, like my cousin always says, Puerto Rico was like a third world country. But like not having access to air conditioner, not having access to reliable electricity was something that people were already experiencing, because there were rolling brownouts on the island because the infrastructure on the island has been deteriorating for decades. All right, so this is an audio clip.
Since Hurricane Maria hit, 40-year-old barber Hector Cruz Santiago hasn't been able to reach his 20-year-old daughter, who's a student at the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan.
Nothing. I've tried 1,000 ways to communicate, and I haven't been able to. It really worries me because I have no idea how she's doing, if she's okay, if she's unwell. It's a huge stress.
Santiago settled in this Puerto Rican enclave of Bethlehem in eastern Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley 15 years ago.
I really have no idea how my family is doing. I just want to know what's going on and to know that they're okay.
Santiago's wife, Luz Estremera, is worried about aid reaching her grandmother and aunts in the coastal town of Guayama. She hasn't heard from them, but she's gotten tidbits of information about her hometown on social networking apps.
Puerto Rico is my island. It's so sad. I love her. I want to live there, but everyone wants to come here. You can't live there anymore.
Adding to their stress, concerns about how the U.S. territory will pay to rebuild given its massive debt crisis, rampant poverty, and high unemployment rate. Puerto Rico's power company owes $9 billion of the island's $72 billion debt. Maintenance cutbacks before the hurricane exacerbated damage to the electric grid. The Lehigh Valley's Puerto Rican community has grown to almost 40,000 people in the last few years. It's sending cans of food and supplies to help the island's residents.
What we are envisioning is as we get more and more of our families from the island, they're going to be coming through here.
At the area's Hispanic Center, Board President Mary Colon believes the hurricane will accelerate the exodus that began due to Puerto Rico's financial crisis.
We have to roll up our sleeves and welcome the families that are coming here, help them as well as help those that are staying behind.
Michelle Cabrera moved with her husband and 2 children to Bethlehem from Puerto Rico 7 years ago and says her sister and niece will soon join them on the mainland.
My mom is still pending because she takes care of her grandparents. They're sick, they're diabetic, and my grandmother does not want to come. She has her house there. She's worried about who's going to care for it if something will happen to it.
Puerto Rico's 3.5 million U.S. citizens have one representative in Congress, but she can't vote. So Cabrera and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here are organizing a letter-writing campaign to Pennsylvania's congressional delegation, asking for more federal aid.
The Puerto Ricans that have, moved from the island here, it is our job to then, make a movement and talk to the community, the representatives, anything that we can do to have that voice.
Yarimar Bonilla, an associate professor of Latino and Caribbean Studies at Rutgers University, is from Puerto Rico.
A lot of people are discovering Puerto Rico and its political status for the first time right now. You have this kind of bureaucratic apparatus that is not able to work quickly and efficiently, especially when they're in a context outside of the continental United States.
She's written about how Caribbean territories like Puerto Rico with limited self-governance are more vulnerable during a crisis.
They have complicated arrangements with U.S. and imperial European powers. So places like Guadeloupe, St. Martin, Turks and Caicos, the British Virgin Islands, a lot of the sites that have been impacted by the hurricane season this year, they are in different kinds of entanglements with the United States and Europe.
Bonilla's mother caught a flight from Puerto Rico and packed as if she'll never go back.
We saw that in New Orleans after Katrina, many people left and did not return. All of us observing this from the United States, we're very scared about what is going to happen to our communities, and we feel the clock ticking.
So we're going to go ahead and skip a little bit, but you can read this article for yourself, of course. I'm going to provide the link down below. But in the 12 years after Hurricane Katrina, psychologists at the American Psychological Association found that nearly half of survivors developed anxiety, depression, or another mood disorder, and rates doubled for suicide and suicidal thoughts. The association's report, released in March, also said that 1 in 6 met the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is 12 years after Hurricane Katrina. Psychologists have since recognized the need for immediate mental health aid after natural disasters. The Texas Psychological Association, for example, has set up a network of more than 100 psychologists who are volunteering their time to help people cope with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. Dr. Rebecca Hamlin, who co-chairs the association's Disaster Resource Network, said, "Most often, people just need to talk to someone without fear they are forcing someone else to relive their experience. Sometimes it means just being able to talk about their experiences overall," Hamlin said. "Some people just need to hear, 'You're not going crazy. You're having a typical response.'" But this type of grassroots network has not been established as part of the aid response to Puerto Rico, neither for the survivors on the island, who are almost entirely off the grid, nor for the families waiting in angst on the mainland. Susan Clayton, professor and chair of psychology at the College of Worcester, compared the response Puerto Rico is getting from the federal government to New Orleans in 2005. She said that a feeling of neglect among disenfranchised communities could make some individuals even more vulnerable to trauma, which is what I read to you guys from the VA website. The unevenness of how communities or even neighbors are affected by natural disasters, as well as the flow of resources, can be a major source of strain, Clayton said, and she will be paying close attention to the mental toll Maria takes. The article continues. Bonilla said she has a strong community in the mainland who are in constant contact online, in person, and through social media networks, but she is still working on sleeping. One night, I was talking to my friends and was asking, "Does anyone have a Valium?" She said, laughing, "One of them told me to just take a Benadryl. That's a poor man's Valium." I'm sorry, let me tell you, Boricuas, we are so similar in a lot of instances, because I remember that. My cousin and I, we always made jokes. I would always tell him, because my cousin suffered a lot when the hurricane first hit, when he was here. I mean, when the hurricane first hit, my cousin suffered way more than I did, because his parents are on the island. They're my tias, and I'm close to them, but it was his own parents. And I would always joke with him. I'm like, "Get un Benadryl. You want a Benadryl?" Because that's what we did. My mom, when we couldn't sleep, she was like, "Get una melatonina. You want a melatonin?" Because we, as people of color, we suffer a lot. We do, and we make so many jokes to cover up our suffering. And back home on the island, Boricuas, we're storytellers. We're funny. Most Boricuas are funny. Most of us are really good at storytelling, because that's how we live. That's how we are able to cope with so much trauma. And, we have to find within ourselves that strength to get through the day, because no one else is going to get through today unless we choose to. And there's no sense in giving up, guys, because we're worth fighting for. We are. So if you want to read more about that article, the link is down below, of course. So this article is from US Today. A lot of panic attacks, mental health, top concern in Maria ravaged Puerto Rico. And this article came out November 13th of this year. Jayuya, Puerto Rico. People who visit a local community center here for bottled water or hot coffee often break down crying or shaking uncontrollably. Maria Vasquez, a community organizer who lost her home to Hurricane Maria 7 weeks ago, often cries at home before heading to the center for help to help others. When members of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, first showed up a few weeks ago with pallets of water, many people started crying, she said. A lot of panic attacks and a lot of crying, Vasquez said. There's a lot of suffering right now. People in this storm-ravaged mountain town still need water, electricity, hot meals, and new roofs. But increasingly, they also need help managing the anxiety and trauma that have seeped into their lives since Maria tore through here, September 20th, demolishing homes and upending lives. The storm destroyed 157 homes in Vasquez's neighborhood alone, she said. Dealing with the long-term mental trauma of Puerto Ricans in the wake of Maria is becoming a growing concern for disaster officials in the island's recovery. The storm killed at least, but this is wrong. The storm has killed anywhere from 985 to 1,065 people, as previously stated in this episode, from the CPI, from the Center of Investigative Reporting from Puerto Rico. There's thousands of homes that have been destroyed in the remote mountain towns, like Jayuya. And they're now cut off even more from the world because the bridges, because of the failing infrastructure that's been that way for decades in Puerto Rico, is crumbling down around all these Puerto Ricans. And then you're expecting us to not experience trauma and to not develop mental illnesses because of the lack of care and respect as human beings that we have received? Stress often sets in as storm survivors transition from securing basic needs like food and water to long-term thoughts of where to live and how to rebuild their homes, said Erwin Redliner, director of the National Center of Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. Quote, people are extremely vulnerable right now. In Puerto Rico, he said, virtually everyone needs some assistance to get through this, unquote. To help people in harder-to-reach communities such as Jayuya, officials at Ponce Health Sciences University nearby Ponce began deploying teams of doctors, psychologists, and public health specialists into the mountains days after the storm. The private medical university has taken a leading role in recovery in the area, and the teams have seen more than 6,000 patients since the storm. A convoy of doctors, administrators, and university students drove more than an hour through winding mountain roads, still being cleared of storm debris and mudslides, to reach the community centers in Mameyes neighborhood of Jayuya. The area has been without power or water. The area has been without power or water since Hurricane Maria. This was reported November 13th. Inside the center, stacks of bottled water and untouched military MREs, so meals ready to eat, sat at one end of the darkened building. At the other, a team of public health students, these are university students, urged locals to wear long pants and closed-toed shoes. These people are doing the work. FYI, this is the work that young people with money in the Diáspora need to do when they're on their next, you know what? During spring break, if you want to go somewhere and you're Boricua and you're going to school in the mainland, honey, go back home and do the work. Do your volunteer work. Put in the labor. We need to help our people. That's what I want. Spring break 2018, we're going to go to Puerto Rico and we're going to do the work. We need to do it. We need to prepare our families' homes for the storm. For the upcoming June 1st, for the upcoming hurricane season. So they're urging people, the health students are urging people to wear long pants and closed-toed shoes if wading into a river to wash clothes because they don't have power. So they don't have a washing machine, so they have to wash their clothes in a river. All right? Just even washing your clothes is a hassle. In November 13th. Okay? And I'm not, I have to verify this, but I don't think they still have power. And it's December 26th. And there are people who are not going to have power for 8 months from now. And there are towns that people haven't even heard from, or people have stopped hearing from. Also, on top of urging people to wear closed-toed shoes and long pants in rivers to wash their clothes, they have to add a few drops of unscented Clorox to water before drinking. At an intake table, university workers checked locals' blood pressure and noted medical histories, then added a few extra questions. Are you sad? Trouble sleeping? Hand tremors? Anxiety? Those with signs of anxiety or stress were directed to psychologists in the rear of the center. Do you think these people are getting the help they need? They don't have enough psychologists. They don't have enough doctors. They don't have enough people helping people in Puerto Rico, guys. We need more people helping. A key function of the school's role in the recovery, said Kenira Thompson, vice president of research at the university, it's essential. The mental health in order to regain some semblance of normalcy, she said. If you don't get a grip on acute stress, which is what I was talking about from the VA page, that could spiral into other things that could become potentially incapacitating. We need to have a way to impact and help these people regain some hope. Eva Medina, 34, who lost her home in the storm, visited Wayuya Center to treat debilitating back pain, but also hoping to talk to someone about the stress of losing her home. Remember, that's one of the factors post-natural disaster of what could worsen or increase the chances of getting acute stress disorder or PTSD. Along with her 13-year-old son, moved in with her parents after the storm. Each time we talk about this subject, it's painful. We could see everything you had, and now you have nothing. After a few hours at the center, some members of the team drove further up the mountain to visit the family of Hector Vargas. Vargas and his brother lost their homes during Maria, and the entire extended family, all 11 members, moved into a half-built home they were in process of building for their elderly mother. The family members sleep on mattresses 5 to a room with a zinc roof and unplastered walls that leak during rainstorms. A strong mudslide could wipe the home off its mountaintop perch and send it crashing to the valley below. They desperately need help fixing the more permanent homes battered by Maria. The mental stress of living in such close and unsafe quarters is wearing on the family, Vargas said. Vargas and his brother applied for FEMA aid about a month ago, but haven't heard from the federal agency, he said. We're waiting to see if they can lend us a hand, he said. I hope to God they'll help us. Here's the video that's on this article, so you can hear their voices.
We started putting together these teams and just heading out to the mountains. And a lot of the times the roads were still not cleared. A lot of the times we were the first responders, the first medical personnel these people had seen since before the hurricane. There were no pharmacies. So we started looking for sources of donations for medical supplies and medication. And ever since,
So that's the voice of Kenira Thompson.
4 days after the storm, we have been working on getting those supplies in and out. So every time a team comes, not only do we send the doctors, the psychologists, the social workers, the nurses, we also bring meds so that they can provide to these communities. We have both an adult doctor here today as well as a pediatrician. And then we also have referrals for mental health services.
I'm depressed. Each time they talk about Hurricane Maria, it's painful.
Estoy en depresión, cada vez que hablan del tema, me duele.
You could see everything you had, and now you have nothing. It's sad.
Que puedes ver todo lo que tenía y ahora no tener nada. Es algo triste.
They've helped us a lot. Many of those who come here, when they start talking about losing their home, they break out crying. It's not easy. I cry before coming to work, then during the day I calm down. So this is Margie Vasquez. But there's a lot of suffering. There have been a lot of panic attacks. The doctors saw them the last time she was here. When FEMA arrived for the first time, people broke out crying. It was horrible and sad. All of us who have lost a house have cried. We're sad, but we're moving forward.
We have social workers, we have people here from our public health department that have been doing education training on the importance of drinking safe water and washing your hands correctly and using the mosquito repellents and other things that are very important to reduce or mitigate public health outbreaks that could come up.
We had some old zinc roofing that I had tied up and the hurricane didn't blow it away. I talked to my brother and we came back and tied it to one side. This side was already covered and we all came here and the rain would wet everything in here. My brother said, let's put another layer of zinc roofing. And we put it on his side so everything wouldn't get directly wet. When it rains, the water still gets in. It's not plastered. It's not very good. This is a very, very improvised, but that's how we've been living. FEMA hasn't visited us yet. We filled out an application. I filled one out by phone. We're waiting to see if they can lend us a hand. And if we can't see what we need, we'll move ahead. I hope to God that they can help us.
Not only do we need to take care of the people physically, we need to help build walls, we need to put roofs over people's homes, we need to give them water and food, but we also need to be there to provide that ray of hope. As long as the people need us, we're going to be out here doing what we're doing.
All right. So that's the video clip. You can see for yourself. I honestly just read the subtitles. Here is another article from the New York Times describing mental health issues that Puerto Ricans are experiencing. After hurricane, signs of a mental health crisis haunt Puerto Rico. This is from the New York Times. Her memories of the storm came in flashes. Neighbor screams, gushing water, swimming against the current with her son. For Milagro Serrano Ortiz, a 37-year-old grandmother with long curly hair, and the nightmare did not end there. After 2 days of sheltering upstairs in a house across the street, she returned home to find the walls caked with mud and a vile stench emanating from her cherished possessions, which were rotting in the heat. Anguished and overwhelmed, she confessed recently to a psychologist at an emergency clinic that she had begun to have disturbing thoughts and worries, that she might act on them. Like what, the doctor said. Like swallowing a bottle of pills, she said, never waking up and not feeling pain anymore. The violent winds and screeching rains of Hurricane Maria were a 72-hour assault on the Puerto Rican psyche. And afterwards, for us in the Diáspora who didn't hear from family for days and even weeks, and there are still people who haven't heard. And there are still people who haven't heard from their loved ones. There are warning signs of a full-fledged mental health crisis on the island, public health officials say, with much of the population showing symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Puerto Rico was already struggling with an increase in mental illness amid a 10-year recession that brought soaring unemployment, poverty, and family separation caused by migration. Public health officials and caregivers say that Maria has exacerbated the problem. Many Puerto Ricans are reporting intense feelings of anxiety and depression for the first time in their lives. Some are paranoid that a disaster will strike again. And people who had mental illnesses before the storm and who have been cut off from therapy and medication have seen their conditions deteriorate. When it starts raining, they have episodes of anxiety because they think their house is going to flood again, said Dr. Carlos del Toro Ortiz, the clinical psychologist who treated Señorita Serrano Ortiz. They have heart palpitations, sweating, catastrophic thoughts. They think, I'm going to drown, I'm going to die, I'm going to lose everything. With hurricane nearly 2 months in the past, the island is still in shock, as residents are haunted by dozens of deaths caused by the storm and many more life-threatening near misses. The reminders are inescapable. They lie in piles of rotting debris as tall as homes that still line many streets, and cell phones that are useless for checking on family members. Returning to a routine is the most important step toward overcoming trauma, according to physicians and public health officials. But for most Puerto Ricans, logistical barriers like scarce water and electricity as well as closed schools and businesses, make that impossible. Since September 20th, when the storm came ashore at 6:15 a.m., more than 2,000 calls have overwhelmed an emergency hotline for psychiatric crisis maintained by the Puerto Rican Health Department, double the normal number for that period, even though most residents still do not have working phones. Puerto Rican officials said that suicides had increased. 32 have been reported since the storm, and many more people than normal have been hospitalized after being deemed dangerous to themselves or others. The emergency health clinic in Toa Baja, where Señorita Serrano Ortiz lives, Dr. Dorro said that he had been frantically calling for help from colleagues in other cities because the facility was overrun with people in need of mental health care. Because it is in a flood zone, Toa Baja was one of the worst affected areas in Puerto Rico. At least 4 people died there, and water levels peaked at more than 12 feet. The city of 80,000 west of San Juan flooded multiple times each time that it rained after Maria passed. In his nearly 20 years of practicing psychology, Dr. Dorro said he had never before hospitalized as many people with suicidal or homicidal thoughts in such a short period. Of about 2,500 people who had been to the clinic since it opened 2 weeks earlier, more than 90% were referred for mental health screenings, Dr. Dorro said. He and other practitioners at the clinic had already referred at least 20 people to psychiatric wards elsewhere on the island. This is an emergency situation, he said. It's still affecting us. There are people that we haven't seen. Health workers are bracing for effects similar to those seen in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, where cases of both moderate and severe psychiatric illnesses spiked. In New Orleans, many people experienced insomnia, cognitive impairment, and short-term memory loss, which became known colloquially and among researchers as Katrina brain. Prolonged losses of electricity, water, communications, or infrastructure have been linked to the onset of mental health crisis, said Dr. Domingo Marquez, the director of clinical psychology at Albizu University, a prominent graduate school of psychology on the island with clinics in 2 major cities. All of those elements have been relentlessly present in Puerto Rico. This is all happening at once, he said. What we have lost is the foundation that holds a society together. He said that Puerto Ricans would have to adjust their definition of normalcy in order to function. It's, I survived, my family didn't die. That's the new definition of okay. This hurricane season has caused mental distress and strained resources for treating it throughout the Caribbean, according to reports from the United States Virgin Islands, Dominica, and Antigua. The Mental Health Division of the Puerto Rican Health Department received $3 million from FEMA to coordinate a response to Maria, said Suzanne Roeg, the administrator of the Puerto Rican agency. It's ROIG. I'm so sorry, guys, if I pronounce that wrong. Lo siento. Its doctors have been knocking on doors in the worst-hit parts of the island and visiting emergency shelters where people who lost their homes have been living. We are trying to reach people to tell them that this crisis will pass, she said, and that they should not make permanent decisions. They should not make permanent decisions like, ending your life or moving to the mainland, because let me tell you, like I said, Pedro Albizu Campos was right. They're going to treat you like a second-class citizen, and they're going to put you on the front lines for war, and they're going to make you a wage slave. No me cree? Come on. Come to the Diáspora, mijo, so you can see what it's like. The agency also started an initiative to monitor social media and staged interventions in a handful of homes of people who posted what appeared to be suicide notes. During high-volume hours, its staff members have been taking on extra shifts and working overtime to respond to the increase in phone calls to the 24 emergency crisis hotline. In addition to struggling with their own emotions, Ms. Roig said that distressed callers had reported children who had not spoken since the storm or cried inconsolably when it rained, and people with serious mental illnesses who had experienced psychotic episodes had been locked inside rooms by family members who did not know what else to do. People who have a prescription can't get a hold of a pharmacy, Ms. Roig said. If they can get to the pharmacy, it might not be open. If it's open, they might not have the medicine. Before the storm, Laura Rodriguez, 39, managed her borderline personality disorder without medication by relying on a strict routine. Early morning CrossFit workouts, long hours at work as an interior designer, going to bed early and never having guests at her home in Rio Piedras. But since Maria hit, her gym had been closed and her therapist had not been working. Neither had she. I'm constantly anxious, she said. I get urges to be violent and I can't control it. Memories of the storm were also tormenting her. She had been trapped inside of her apartment for 2 days with her boyfriend, her mother, and her mother's cat. They used plastic tarps, towels, bedsheets, and pieces of wood to try to plug the windows where rain water was surging through. Without access to any of the balms that she typically relied on to stabilize her mood, she was worried about resorting to self-harm, an impulse that she had struggled to control since she was 8 years old. What if it's like 3 months, 4 months, she said. I cannot do this for so long. For Señorita Serrano Ortiz, another threat to her mental and physical health loomed. Before the storm, a scan of her throat had indicated that she may have cancer for the second time, but she has not been able to get any more information about her prognosis because her doctor's offices have been closed. At the emergency clinic, she told Dr. Torro that she might not have the energy to fight the disease again. When she looked in the mirror, she said she saw in herself a reflection of her home, something dirty, smelly, and tainted. I don't feel like myself anymore, she said. So this outro isn't going to be the greatest, but I did have to put an outro in this episode because I didn't want it to end on such a depressing note on an episode talking about mental health and trauma. So what we can focus on as a Diáspora is sending direct aid during our, if we can afford to go to the island before June 1st, helping our family, especially the elderly in our family, prepare their homes if we can afford it to protect their homes from the next hurricane season. For those of us in the Diáspora, sending our family canned goods, sending them water, sacrificing, your money and sending it to them directly. Stop giving our money to charities that are NGOs that are just another open secret of how people with how the elites manipulate and move their money around without people suspecting them of being bad people. I mean, educating ourselves, reading, recording our own history, because no one else is going to do it the way we are going to do it. No one is going to tell the stories, our stories, the way they're supposed to be told. In order for our families to stay on the island, we have to assist them and we have to help them. And we live in a capitalist society, so we have to give them money. Our families. And we also have to take care of our mental health so we can take care of our families back home on the island. So, educating ourselves, educating our neighbors, our Euro-American neighbors about what's happening back home is a part of the work. It is laborious, and then instead of having to tell them every detail of all the suffering our people have gone through for over a century, you can direct them to resources, make a list of books, so you don't have to constantly explain yourself to people, that they can do their own homework. And I can say that if you really care about your Boricua friends, you will make an effort to learn about their history instead of having them constantly explain everything to you when you have eyes and you have a brain and you claim that you have reading comprehension. Well, then do your own research, and then you won't have to use someone else to get information that is accessible to you via the internet. And that's all I've got for episode 1 of Knowledgesacks 2.0, Boricuas en la Diáspora. I hope you guys have a good week.